All right. Thank you, Wes Blaze.
That was a
no
long
worries.
one.
It was a
Yeah.
little bit.
Nice lengthy portion there. What are some first thoughts that come to you guys? Josh, what about you, brother?
Well, the first thing that I really love in this is how Pharaoh puts Joseph in charge, and some of the things that he does. He says, as for you, nobody will be above you, and he puts his signet ring on. And I kind of like the symbolism of the ring, because if I'm not mistaken, isn't the ring also what has the seal for when they mark something as like coming from the king or having the authority of the king?
Yeah.
Back
That was
in those
my
days?
understanding for the most part. Yeah, most dignitaries, princes, governors, it was like a little bulla inscription on the other side of the ring, and then they would,
Mm-hmm.
be
It's
able
like
to steal
a
stuff and
physical
watch.
representation of agency.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah. So I love that. Love that part of it.
That way, if you got to punch somebody, you're just going to leave that seal on their forehead.
You've been knocked out by the king.
That's right.
We see the writing style Genesis is famous for, right? Then expounding, giving details or a summary, and then goes back and gives more details. But also, I can't help but notice they're preparing for the famine, which it reminds me of like how often it's said that the Torah portions sometimes have like an uncanny resemblance to current real world events. And I can't help but notice like a parallel to the situation on the world stage of today, right? In preparing for the times to come, both of famine of food and of the word potentially or inevitably.
Yeah. Actually, I know some guys that are actually doing that right now.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting.
It makes me grateful, to the Father that we have the stability and the opportunity that we do have now, to store up the
Right.
necessities and study up on the word and store
Yeah.
treasures in heaven.
Kind of like that unintended benefit of being in the land of your enemies, so to speak. A lot of people have compared modern day America to ancient Egypt, as just as far as some of the overall practices that happen. We actually have pyramids on our money. We've got, the Eye of Ra on our money. You know what I'm saying? We've got all kinds of obelisks and domes and pyramid-like structures and designs all over this country. And even though while there's a huge amount of believers in this country that worship, the God of heaven and earth, they don't worship the gods of Egypt. They still are inside a system that they don't always agree with. Just like Joseph is in a system he didn't agree with. He's trying to make the best of it. But the unintended benefit of being in that system is the abundance that is being procured. And Joseph is being instructed or given the opportunity to turn that around for the good of everybody, whether all those other people really agree with his view on the creator of heaven and earth. So I think that's wonderful because we have that same opportunity today, right? We can take this abundance that's available to us while it's available to us, and we can do our best to make that available to more people in a more sustainable way. Joseph's going to be doing that over the next 7 years. And I think it's a wonderful parallel to modern times.
Well, I also think it's interesting too. I mean, when you were just mentioning, the obelisks and all the different things that would be, considered pagan practices. We've seen the same thing that happens, after the Israelites get out of Egypt, God has to re-instruct them on the Torah and the law and everything, because after being in that environment for 400 years, they've mixed too many things. They don't quite remember all the ways to follow Yahweh appropriately. And same things happening here.
That's right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Well said. So for everyone following along at home, guys, we offer these Torah portion slides and all the information that's on these in a PDF form. We offer them for free on our Patreon. Link is in the video description for below. You do not have to be an actual supporting member of Patreon. You can actually go to the Patreon post at the link below to the posts on our Kingdom and Context Patreon page, and you can download these PDFs of these study materials every week. So I try to provide the weekly or the chapter summaries with each portion, so that if you're at home studying on your own with friends or family, you've got some good bullet points to talk about in a quick fashion. So here in Genesis 41, we just see that Pharaoh has two different dreams in one night. Both dreams disturbed him. The cupbearer remembered Joseph had accurately interpreted his dreams and tells Pharaoh about it. This is wonderful because this is kind of like last week, Joseph was a little sad because the cupbearer forgot about him. And I couldn't quite find exactly how long it had been since the cupbearer got out of prison and then into this moment here. So all I know is, Joseph's been in prison for, I'm going to say at least 2 years, because I was trying to do the math with what I was reading from Jubilees and Testament of 12 Patriarchs versus what we're going to read later in this portion today, where it says he's 30 years old he's 30 years old at this point when he's taken over. and so I was trying to do the math as far as him having spent 7 years with in Potiphar's household as his manager, versus he went down into Egypt at 17 years old. So that puts him about 24 years old by the time he goes to prison, and then he gets out in this moment and is made viceroy or second command of all of Egypt at 30 years old. So unless I'm missing something, it's about 6 years he was in prison, which is not cool. But apparently he was the prison manager really loved him. So he was kind of, taking charge in the prison and being a manager in the prison also. So this dude's got incredible managerial skills, and the Pharaoh recognizes this in this moment. How interestingly easy is it for Joseph to be like, oh, so here's what you should do, and you know what, you should find someone wise and able to carry this out. And so like so you should find someone wise and discerning that should carry this out for you. You know what I'm saying? He's like freshly shaved, got some nice clothes on now finally. So I just think it's great that Pharaoh's like, yep, you're the dude. If you can see this, if you can discern what my dream was, and you're definitely the guy. So after he interprets its dreams, Joseph interprets the dream to mean 7 years of agricultural abundance will precede 7 years of famine. Joseph offered a plan of action to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh recognized the wisdom Joseph possessed. So Pharaoh appointed Joseph as second command of Egypt. Joseph began carrying out the plan to prepare for the coming famine. He also gives Joseph an Egyptian name, and also the daughter of the priest of On as his wife. And then his wife during this time gives birth to Manasseh and Ephraim. What do you guys think about the moment where he receives the daughter of the priest of On? By the way, which is Heliopolis.
Her name is Heliopolis, you said?
No, I'm sorry. On, the city of On is the city of Heliopolis, which is actually on the border of like right on the River Nile Delta in the territory of Goshen. And this is why later he's going to give his family the territory of Goshen as well. But what do you guys think about this as him being a man trying to follow Yahweh, and he's given the daughter of an occultic priest?
I think there's an instruction that says not to do that, not to marry them, right? But I'd imagine it was kind of a honor of royalty that they recognized his authority as the viceroy of Egypt, right? So they thought that they were doing a good thing. Go ahead.
But he goes through with it. So, he has children with her, and they seem to be blessed. Jacob, his father, when he blesses him, he blesses the two children instead of Joseph. Sure. So
we're not told how old this lady is. I think her name's Asenath. We're not told how old she is. We're not told her backstory. We have no clue. We don't know if this was like the Canaanite daughters of the priests, where they were commonly the harlots at the temple. We don't know if that's her backstory or not. I'm just guessing. If Joseph had this kind of sway, he would have declined the offer if she was probably a former temple prostitute. But either way, he's definitely, it doesn't seem to change his devotion to Yahweh.
No, I like to think of it as he got her grafted in.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And it makes me wonder what kind of conversations are being had here, because, that means he's now an authority over the priest of On to some degree. And that's an interesting dynamic, I should say, right? Because we're talking like ancient Egyptian priests. I mean, this guy's like trying to channel Anubis. So like, this is serious. Yeah. This is like back in ancient Egypt. Right. So I just makes me wonder, like what kind of conversations are being had, because, we don't see at any point in this story his walk with the Father being diminished or hindered. It's not like the situation with Solomon, right, where his heart was swayed because he married the daughters of the foreign daughters. So yeah, it's interesting.
Well, if anybody could have instructed her and showed her the way of Yahweh, it would have been Joseph, right?
Yeah. Like we kind of read last week, he was trying to do that with Potiphar's wife. Now I'm thinking that this is Potiphera. I don't know if that's a language issue here or if that's actually a different guy. They're just two different people with two different names, or the same name but two different people. What do you guys think?
Well, sorry, go ahead, Wes, please.
Oh, I was just gonna say I assumed it was the same person, but I don't know for sure.
Well, I've thought the same thing, but then I was reading the Testament of 12 Patriarchs that Potiphar's wife had no children, and Joseph ended up praying for her to have children. Isn't that correct? So if that was the case, then that would have to be a long time later, or as we were talking earlier, she would be really young at first, because that wouldn't make much sense if it was the same person. And unless Potiphar had multiple wives, but it doesn't say that. But
he did have multiple wives. He had a concubine that
Okay.
was in according to Testament 12 patriarchs that was jealous with him. And actually, brings up Hannibal asked last week in the chat as we were reviewing that the Testament of Jubilees mentions that, I think it's also in Genesis, that Potiphar was a eunuch, but yet we see him mentioned, his wife having babies in the Testament of Joseph. So the obvious question a lot of people have is, well, wait a minute, is he a eunuch? I thought a eunuch was someone that couldn't have kids. Well, I don't know their actual ancient definition for eunuch, because I know that what Yeshua tells us is that some eunuchs are made that way, some are born that way, and others live that lifestyle for the kingdom of God. So if he, in all accounts, Jubilees, Testament of Joseph, and Genesis, Potiphar had a wife. I don't know why a eunuch would have a wife to begin with, if he's a eunuch in the tradition, in the sense that we're thinking, right? If we're thinking like he's got his member chopped off, because that was the ancient practice for a lot of cultures to make eunuchs. So I don't know if he was a eunuch in that regard, because he had a wife anyway, right?
Mhm.
So unless it was just, what's that?
Sorry, couldn't it also be that he had the wife before he became a eunuch?
That's what I was going to say. There's a variety of things that we're not told. One option is what West Blaze just said. Another option is what we see with described as in the Testament of Joseph, as his chastity was as if he was one of the eunuchs. So it makes me think that these guys were considered as eunuchs because they were proving themselves in the eyes of their master, which Potiphar would be under the reign of Pharaoh, to be as a eunuch because of they're not taking all the women in the royal court and sleeping with them. So I'm just, and again, I don't know exactly how they're using the term eunuch in all three different books, but in all three different books, he has a wife.
Mhm.
So it's definitely not the way we're thinking of it, in my understanding. But he did apparently had two wives, and they were in competition with each other, according to the Testament of Joseph. And I agree with you, Josh, that the age seems odd, because if he was 24 when the time he was put to jail by Potiphar's wife, she'd already had two kids since then. He gets out when he's 30. That means the kids are less than 10 years old. He has Manasseh and Ephraim here. And this, even if it's at the latter end of the 7 years of abundance, then that's still, they're not even, I guess they would be 18 years old. I don't know, maybe it's slightly possible they could have been the daughters of the same person he was working in the household of, but I don't remember the Potiphar being described as the priest of anything. So I don't know if it's two different guys or not.
Somebody in the chat mentioned there's a text called The Story of Joseph and Asenath, that it answers all the questions we're talking about, apparently. I haven't heard of it, but might be worth a look into.
Yeah.
I can tell you one thing: if it was in fact Pharaoh's or Potiphar's daughter, the wife who wanted to be with Joseph, her daughter, that probably would have been a thorn in her side. Of, man, what the heck? For years I tried to get. I just think
And then the daughter gets with him. Yeah.
right.
Well, that would, and in some way that would almost make sense as a form of familiarity, right? If he was in their household as a older male person, servant, and this sense of familiarity would have been there. I see that, but either way, yeah, until we have further study, I personally don't know if it's the same person, but I'm fascinated by the idea that, like, we're talking ancient Heliopolis, guys. Like, this is a big deal.
Mhm.
This is besides Memphis, this was another capital area city where they had, the priests would live. This would be where, they've got all these structures built to Osiris and Ra and Set and Horus. And like, this was an occultic center. So I guess what's encouraging about all this to me is that this guy's living in the thick of it, like in the absolute thick of an occultic culture. And the Father's given him favor, which I love this, because it's the Torah. This is the Torah of God, right? This, he says in Leviticus 26, and in King Solomon repeats this in his prayer in 1 Kings 8, that when you're in the land of your enemies, if you continue to be faithful to Yahweh, he will give you favor in the eyes of your enemies. And that even though Joseph went through some rough years, he's now going to step into the rest of his entire life a moment of favor in the land of his enemies. And I just think this is a beautiful fulfillment of covenant.
Into the thick of it.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right. I should have prepared the clip, but just see Joseph into the thick of it, into the thick of it.
Oh,